All right, so we're gonna talk about something today that's been out for a while. I know it's not new. It's my first time taking a look at it, so we'll take you guys along for the ride. No, it's not about this case. This is just what MSI sent. We're gonna take a look at their Project Zero stuff. This is where ASUS and MSI were the first to the market to come up with the idea of putting cables and plugs on the back side of the motherboard to just clean up the front side of the case even more and not have wires and stuff showing. So they sent me over their Project Zero motherboard, which has said features, and then ASUS has what they call their BTF, which stands for back to front. I don't have any of those to take a look at. I don't know why they sent me these fans, but okay. So we're gonna take a look at this today. This is the Z790 Project Zero. So obviously the Z790 chipset would be a top tier chipset. Been using MSI motherboards on our test benches now for a while, or at least our Intel test bench. I've been pretty happy with it. So here we are, Project Zero. Oh, I guess this is, so one thing you may or may not know, when MSI sends a motherboard, they show the full testing stuff and overview of the motherboard. It's actually really nice. It's a nice sheet. Normally it's just a wrinkly sheet of paper, but we're not testing the motherboard today. We're not even gonna fire it up. I'm just curious as to what this is gonna look like installed in the case. A lot of case manufacturers are now starting to incorporate BTF / Project Zero type of, we'll take a look at the case when we get it out, pass-throughs, because obviously you have to be able to get the cables to the backside of the case. So if your case does not have support for BTF or Project Zero, then it's not going to be compatible at all. Because if you look at the motherboard from the traditional side, that's actually a pretty sexy motherboard, all the brushed aluminum. I don't care for the Project Zero, but if that wasn't there, it'd look really clean and minimalistic. MSI tends to really lead into the dragon stuff, if you know what I'm saying. So there's no dragon anywhere on here, which I think looks awesome. It's one of the things I hate most about MSI motherboards. There's always a dragon logo and stuff, but ditch the big Project Zero, just leave it right here, and I think that would have looked super slick. Obviously, the connectors and everything, as you can see, are on the backside, including USB 3.0, USB-C, our SATA, our fans, our front side connectors, USBs, temperature probes, our front side connectors, I already said, our EPS, everything's on the back. There is not a single cable on the front side of the motherboard. So the only thing you would actually need to plug into the front side at all would be your graphics card, your storage, RAM, and CPU. Now, one thing that Project Zero doesn't have, that BTF has, and this is where ASUS I think is a little bit superior in this aspect, is they also have BTF connectors for the graphics card. So for 40 series graphics cards and the 4090, I think this probably works well. I don't know, I haven't done any of the sort of connector testing to see what the power draw through the BTF connector for the graphics card is, but they actually have another plug right here that looks like a PCI Express, and it looks like a short PCI Express is actually the power delivery for the graphics card. So the PCI Express / 12 volt high power, I'm not sure which connector they use, I assume it's 12 volt high power, plugs into the backside of the motherboard and then just pushes right through to that connector and then feeds the graphics card. So even the graphics card doesn't have a wire showing on the front side of the ASUS cards. That's where I think MSI is a little behind on the BTF and / Project Zero type stuff. Now, obviously this isn't a standard. ATX is a standard, right? These cables right here, the EPS 12 volt high power cables, it's just 4 12 volts and 4 grounds, 24 pin. All this stuff is it's a standard now when it comes to power supply connectors and stuff, but the layout itself is not standardized. So it'll be interesting to see how other motherboards start to incorporate this as this sort of catches on, which is gonna put a lot of stress on the case manufacturers, because the more holes you add to the motherboard tray of a case, the less rigidity you're gonna have. So I'm curious to see how many different iterations of back to front type connectors we'll be able to support in the future without having the case basically be a flimsy piece of metal. All right, let me get this case unboxed. I'm not sure if we have any other cases here that actually support backside connectors. I'll take a look at our inventory and see, because obviously the MSI cases are gonna have to support their own product. The question is whether or not they're gonna support other competitors like say ASUS and their BTF standards. So let me get this out and see what it looks like once we get the stuff installed. So we'll start with the MSI Pano 100LPZ. I don't know what the PZ stands for. It doesn't look like 100 liters either, but whatever, I digress, what do I know? So here you can see all the cutouts. It looks like it actually would support BTF as well, not just their own Project Zero. And I'm feeling that way because of this cutout right here. So you can see how it's in line with the PCI Express slot as well as right here. Interestingly enough, this is not really a case review, but I'm gonna talk about it anyway. And these are put on with Hulk fingers, apparently. It comes pre-set up for vertical mount, and you can mount the vertical mount right to this plate right here, but it doesn't come with the riser cable. So since it doesn't come with the riser cable, we have to convert it back to a standard mount, which at least comes with the case. So this just pops out. It's got the riser, or not the riser, but the support for it already on there. Then we can literally take this guy, whoop, put it in, there we go. So in terms of the rigidity though, it's pretty rigid. Like I was worried that this was gonna be really flimsy considering how much material is removed to support obviously the back to front, excuse me, Project Zero. It really is back to front. I like ASUS's naming better than Project Zero. The idea is Project Zero cables, but the problem is there's still a GPU cable. So it's not Project Zero, it's Project 95%. So anyway, if we put this in here like this, and you need to make sure everything lines up when you go to push it in, otherwise you're gonna like flatten some cables. So as long as you, or pins I should say, as long as you line up the IO on the backside, right here, everything should theoretically line up just fine. So here's the motherboard installed. Unfortunately, because the case has to also support non-Project Zero and BTF motherboards, you get these additional holes which really are useless except for maybe the fans. Right?
And the grommets too,
Yeah, the grommets here. I mean, they have to have full support, right? So if we turn around and look on the backside though, you can see if you so this is where things could start to get maybe a little bit crammed, if you will, because now we only have to go from our power supply to here. So if we open the bottom right here, which I have to undo this thumb screw, we have an area that we can at least sort of, you know, hide the cables and sort of get them out of the way, which is down here. But then if you have a jumble of cables here, we still have to connect any ARGB down here, fan headers, SATA ports there, SATA ports there. So everything back here, it's now gonna be kind of a jumbled mess behind the motherboard. Like this is something that I didn't really think about when I was going, oh yeah, hiding all the cables in the back, that sounds like a great idea. But because of the fact that usually you have to run your cables around, you can have that length and something to do with them, you can hide other cables right here. But now the cable routing area directly covers the stuff that we don't want to interfere with. So for instance, you see where these straps are, these Velcro straps, that's where you're supposed to kind of cable manage your cables, but they would be right on top of this. Now, USB 3.0, pretty solid. USB-C, like this connector, you could easily like torque that and break it. So here's our USB-C. Stop closing! Okay, so here's our USB-C right here. I guess that's not too terribly in the way either.
USB 3.
Or there's again. Oh God, it's gonna do the thing where it's gonna try and pull the whole socket out. Okay, so here's our USB 3 right here. Also not too terribly in the way, but we have all this slack to deal with. So you could sort of zip tie this kind of like that and out of the way. You can see our 2.5-inch drive sleds are right here. So anything you start tucking in down here, make sure if you're gonna use these sleds that they're not interfering. Otherwise, maybe remove the sleds entirely. But there's that right there. What do we got here? Here's the USB-C. This is just a kind of a heavy duty ribbon cable. So we plug this guy in. Does anyone else think it's incredibly ironic that USB-C itself can turn either direction, but the cable plugging into it for the motherboard can't? Like, this really goes one way. There's that way. If you flip it around the other way, it doesn't fit. So we just think that's odd that it works one way but not the other on the motherboard side, but it can go either direction on the plug side. So this one you can see is kind of like weird, right? It wants to, so I guess you could sort of do that like that, I guess. Sure, that's kind of okay. Now I really do have to install a power supply right now, otherwise, right, because that's cool. But now we need to see how much room we actually have between our power supply here. I guess it won't be too bad. The cables can just come down here and then come back up. As long as we can still access everything down here, not have anything get hooked on it, especially like the sleeving on power supplies, like has a lot of holes in it. And if that gets hooked on one of these pins and yanks it and bends it real bad, could potentially break a pin off the backside of the motherboard. So let's just randomly grab a power supply. All right, so this is just a black Revolt X from Fantex. Not incredibly long. Fortunately, power supplies are getting shorter these days. So you can see we have all this extra cable length we sort of have to deal with right now. So here's our 24 pin. So I guess I'll just kind of like that, I guess. That's so weird. So you can see the motherboard flexing. I didn't put in all the standoffs. Normally I'm used to pushing down on the cable against the standoff so the motherboard is firm. But like, it's just weird pushing against those screws. Okay, so I guess that could go like that. That's really not too bad. But you see, look, already that was pushing on the ARGB cable right there. So you would definitely want to zip tie this stuff together. Keep it nice and sort of tucked and out of the way. I only have one CPU header on this one plugged in right now. That's fine for demonstration purposes. There's that. Once again, we could choose to take the slack and bring it down that way. That way it's not showing through the holes on the top because it still has to have compatibility for non-back to front. But this is the unfortunate thing about the way MSI has designed these cards is you still have this guy. Pretend it's a 12 volt high power or a 12 volt 2x6 or 6x2, whatever the hell they call it now. So this still has to make its way to the front for any potentially installed power or graphics card. So now this kind of looks stupid. Like you got this one cable now, right? Oh well, I guess you have to have that because I mean, the thing is, unless you're gonna run out and buy an Asus branded graphics card specifically for its BTF functionality, you're still gonna have to have something plugged in to your graphics card. So I guess if you can just sort of like, yes, I know this is a PCI Express cable and not a 12 volt. So I guess you can just sort of maybe route it a way that doesn't look stupid. That's still cleaner than having other cables going everywhere. But fortunately though, most cases, because of the fact that if the 12 volt was right here and the grommets right there, you just have this short little cable run anyway. And then yeah, you don't have them showing up here for the 8 volt or the 8 EPS power. But that's pretty convenient though. If you've ever installed in a case, let's say you've put your motherboard in, you got your CPU cooler on there, you've mounted, if it's an AIO, you've mounted the radiator, it's right here. Or if you have a big like multi-tower air cooler that's blocking the cable and you go, oh crap, I forgot to plug in my EPS. Then you're taking off your cooler or your rad or something to plug it in. It's definitely more convenient to just do it after the fact right there. So it's definitely got some pros for it. It is very clean. I mean, it would be even cleaner and more stealthy if that were an all blacked out motherboard, black graphics card and stuff, but yeah. I mean, but you can imagine if it didn't have a power cable going for the power supply, which is where the BTF form factor would be super clean for like the way Asus has it, that'd be it. There'd be no cables at all, with the exception of the fan cables. So that's actually super, super clean. This isn't a case review for MSI. Seems like a pretty solid case though. There's a lot of things I don't like about this case though. For instance, on the bottom, if we look down here, we do have a fan filter, which this one on the bottom is magnetic. This entire case really is intended for bottom to top airflow. You do have this motherboard tray area that you could utilize, but I think for cleanliness, aesthetics and stuff, I would prefer this to just be like a blocked off plate, or at least have a clean plate to block it if you weren't gonna use it as airflow. Have your 3 fans on the bottom blowing air up, fresh air right to the graphics card, and then obviously 3 exhaust fans on the top, and maybe a rear exhaust if you need to. The top, however, so this is the top panel, not the greatest porosity. You got these long, sort of, not cylindrical, but these rectangular vents with a fairly thin opening versus the amount of blocked off area there is. And you have this, this fan filter, which is glued in. So you can't actually remove the fan filter. Personally, if I were using the top as exhaust, I would not want the fan filter here. I would just want the best airflow for exhaust because the intake fans are responsible for the fan filtering or the air filtering, not the exhaust. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cheap. And it came off in one whole piece. So there, I'd much rather have this, especially given how poor I feel like this ventilation design is. It is a little raised, as you can see. So it's got this kind of a peak right here, which adds a little bit of volume between the top where the fans are and the exhaust. So that helps a little bit actually with getting that air exhaust out. But I would prefer that to have maybe matched the same sort of a digital design it has going here for the rest of the filtrate or the rest of the ventilation. This is the back panel right here. Again, the same glued in, well, this just says pull on this one. Okay, so this one at least can come out. There it goes. So yeah, it's got this sort of a digital look to it with these little blocked out squares and stuff. Pretty neat looking, I guess, but it's like edgy. It's like MSI is like, bro, we're edgy, you know? We don't just have dragons. Anyway, I think it is actually pretty clean. And then obviously the case itself, if your case supports it, there is a list online you can find of cases that currently support Project Zero or BTF. I mentioned the V270, we'll take a look at that one real quick. In my opinion, the Cougar case is superior to the MSI one we just took a look at. But anyway, the best way to identify if a case you're looking at supports the BTF / Project Zero form factor is if you see all these extra cutouts. Specifically this one, these three, this one, this one, this one. The ones on the bottom are always gonna be there for the front side connectors, you know, for every single motherboard. So these bottom cutouts should always be there. But this one, this one, this one, this one, and these three really tell us that this is a Project Zero / BTF case. So I also wouldn't go purely off the list that's online. The reason why I say that, this case isn't listed on that list. So look at the pictures. That's the best way to truly identify if it's Project Zero supported. So I'm gonna take that motherboard out real quick and throw it in here, as well as with the white 4080 right here, just to see how it looks in a more appropriate kind of an aesthetic setting for that motherboard. One thing I want to point out too with the back connect stuff is every time I go to grab it, I'm used to grabbing it like this, and it stabs me every time I grab it because it's like, I tend to grab it from the bottom or the top, and either way I'm getting stabbed. So I just want to point that out. It's like, I just did it again. I just did it again. No matter where you grab it from the back, it's gonna stab you. Like old habits die hard. So there it is. It's actually really, really sexy. I do like the way this looks a lot. It's just unfortunate that we would still have a 12-volt high power cable by using Project Zero motherboard. Again, right now there's only 2 manufacturers currently, I think, that are making back connect motherboards, and that is MSI and Asus. I'm sure Gigabyte is on the horizon. It'll be interesting to see how they do this though. The downside about like Asus having the BTF Connect format for the graphics cards is if you're just shopping and you're not paying attention that it says BTF on it, then you'll get the graphics card and it won't slot in your motherboard because that tab will be there and there's no 12-volt high power connector on it at all. But there is what it looks like on the back side. So as you can see, yeah, everything clears. It's a pretty standard format. I mean, as long as they stay within these guidelines of where everything is supposed to land, there you go. And then because our power supply in this case is all the way in the bottom, that'll take up some of the length we need. Now the thing to think about here is the depth of the back of the case is important, because if you have a real thick cable that has to make a bend and then bend again, if it sticks out, then it might push against your side panel real hard. Just keep that in mind. The deeper, like the dual chamber cases, like the Lee and Leo 11 type cases that have a big back chamber will be the most compatible because they have the biggest depth. But this will have a little bit less available depth to it, but I can tell that we have at least an inch right here, which would be enough for a normal cable to be able to make the bend. But that looks so good. Let's talk about whether or not I recommend this though. Pros and cons of it. Pro, it looks super clean. And it doesn't matter if your power supply has maybe not the greatest looking cables. The downside of this though is the fact that it requires basically building an entirely new setup. So I really think it only appeals or should appeal to someone that's building a computer from scratch. Meaning, because you're gonna have to buy a new case to support the motherboard. And then the motherboard obviously needs to be the back connect style. Now, if we're talking about Asus stuff, that means you also are gonna buy a new graphics card because you wanna take advantage of the BTF connector for the graphics card as well. In fact, I personally like Asus's implementation more. And I know I've already said that, and that's only because it truly gets rid of every cable going to the motherboard from the front side, period. So the extra connector though, if done right, alleviates any of the 12-volt power connector problems that we've seen, because you have a rigid PCB making a direct connection just like the PCI Express slot. So that's preferred in my opinion. I think it alleviates some of those problems, but now you're talking new graphics card, new motherboard, new case. So that's why I say if it's somebody that's building the case from scratch or the system from scratch, it makes the most sense. Also too, if you want to upgrade to a BTF or a back connect motherboard, that's the overall terminology is back connect, then a new case is going to pretty much be required. Like I said, there's not very many cases on the market, probably less than 12, that actually support back connect. But this might become the future standard. Who knows? I think every case moving forward from 2024 and beyond will probably support back connect. Because I know several case manufacturers we're talking with right now on some upcoming cases that aren't out yet are all, and that's a question I've been asking is, does it support back connect? And the answer is yes. Pretty much every case is being adapted in future revisions to support back connect stuff. But it's a new standard that's all about aesthetics. If you're one of those people that's like, I don't even want a window in my case. I don't even care what the inside looks like. I just want the function over the form, then none of this appeals to you anyway. And there's extra cost associated with it, of course, because the reason being, if we were to see what the sales figures were or are of current back connect motherboards versus standard ATX layout motherboards, I bet you it's gotta be low single digit adoption right now. It's gotta be. But it might become the new thing in the future. Who knows? And then companies that make custom cables are probably pissing their pants right now going, uh-oh, what do we do? Because you can't see our cables anymore. So sometimes innovation leaves some current stuff behind. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I just wanted to take you guys along for the ride of me taking a look at back connect stuff in person for the first time. I know this debuted at like Computex last year, and then CES again, and then obviously 2024, this stuff made it to market and is like fully available now. But even at Micro Center when we were there shopping, I didn't notice any of these motherboards there. So I really am curious as to how widespread they are in availability. Anyway, there you go. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, we'll see you in the next one.